Hello and welcome to episode 25 of In at the Side. I'm Dom Harben. Tonight I'm joined by Scenario Neil with sub JK in for Donovan. And this evening we're joined by the man who does this.
Need to be because Pontypridd can strike. Lyle running into John, but still Dan Lyle. Look at him go.
Of course, we're joined by former USA Eagles and Bath Rugby legend, Mr. Dan Lyle. How are you this evening, Dan?
Yeah, I'm fantastic. Still the morning here, right? I'm about 7 hours behind you guys in the Rocky Mountain country in Colorado.
Very nice. And that must be an amazing place to be on lockdown, to be honest, if you are, obviously.
Yeah. We're in lockdown. I think very similar to you guys. There's a partial relief of people going back to work, but luckily I look at my window right here, and there's the par 3 of the golf course.
Nice.
You guys just happen to just up everybody's Jones, and they could charge $1 million for a round of golf right now, and people would pay it, even though we're all suffering, So
yeah,
definitely. So yeah, we'll just have a little start on your career. So when did you first sort of come into the notion of rugby over in the States?
Yeah, I had seen rugby and had a few mates at university that played it, but I obviously was playing American football. And then when I finished playing, I had 2 or 3 trials with the Washington Redskins, the NFL. And, back then in the, dating in the early 90s, there wasn't all the sports performance centers that there are now, all the high performance, pre-NFL drafts and all that kind of stuff. So cousin playing rugby for the Washington Rugby Club in D.C., Washington, D.C. And he said, hey, come run around with us and stay fit and all that kind of stuff. And I did. And I just, immediately took to it. It was, I always tell people that rugby's less like American football. It's more like soccer and basketball because you're playing this open running field vision, people through gaps, playing team defense. That's what soccer and basketball is. What football does is it kind of gives you that physical proprioception. Again, gives you that kind of the ability to bump into people and run into people a little bit more, and maybe some of those skills of running after balls and and jumping up for stuff. But that for me, that was more about space and time of soccer, and the jumping and the agility and the court vision. So I'd played all of those sports from a real early age all the way through, senior school and into university. So I really adapted to it pretty quickly.
In terms of American football, or football as you guys call it, obviously, what position did you play? Were you offense, defense?
Yeah, at high school level, secondary, I played both offense and, most people do. So I played kind of a linebacker, safety position, and then on offense I played tight end, which is like the big receiver. You're on the it very much fits into the back row. The back row is kind of that same thing, right? On offense, you're catching the ball, you're doing things, but you're also doing some of the hard yard, blocking and tackling type stuff. And that linebacker safety side of things is the same thing you do, kind of a little bit more, kind of a balance between the.
Well, on the defense, I keep calling it defense. I can't call it the English way anymore because since I played myself, we had an American coach.
I knew this was going to come up.
Linebacker. I used to play linebacker and defensive end, and I absolutely loved it. But I would have hated to be on the offense. I'd rather much do the tackling than be than get tackled myself. But no, it's such a great sport. And I remember obviously what you said about certain skills being. Come across to each sport. I found the season after I started playing American football, I came back to rugby. I was hitting like a steam train, literally. Like you have to keep remembering to wrap people up because obviously in American football you'll just run into people. But yeah, I mean it's I love the sport. I wish I could go back into it.
The irony of that is that so when I didn't make the Redskins and I started playing for 2 years and had a real quick acceleration, kind of was a project player of the U.S. team and was doing a lot of stuff. I was playing a ton of rugby, and then I got called back by the Minnesota Vikings to come and do a trial with them 2 years. I hadn't played American football for 2 years and just only had played rugby. And I'd played a few international sevens events. I'd gotten capped, my first cap with 15s and a couple of other events. And I was much better of a football player because of rugby, because of, all that open chain running, all that kind of field, so forth. So, and just be, you just, you're it's more like being a basketball player. And I think, I'm biased, but I think basketball players, the size of those, are probably some pound for pound, one of the most dynamic human beings on the planet, right? It's just the ability to do certain things, but, so yeah, I mean, it goes both ways, you can learn a lot from a lot of sports in America. That's why I always tell people, some of the state championship high school teams, right? Who play in bigger stadiums than Premiership stadiums, right? Some of those, like in Austin, Texas, the 5A Texas champions called Westlake High School. They also have the state champion rugby team, and they've actually in the off season they play rugby and so there's a few California schools that are like that as well. So it's a good crossover. There's no doubt.
In terms of on the professional level, sorry, just to add on to that, do you think, because obviously America, is all over America, but that's the top sport along with basketball and baseball. But would you think that, I mean, in the Premiership, obviously, there's a lot of young players that get to a certain level and then don't make the grade and sort of, slip into the wayside, go into the lower leagues, that sort of thing. Do you think American rugby can benefit by picking up, and I hate to say it this way, sort of the cast-offs of a lot of these American football teams, or is there a sort of mentality that the kids almost, because they don't understand it, don't want to get into rugby? Do you think that could help?
Well, I mean, look, our men's and women's sevens teams are perfect examples of crossover athletes. I mean, they're top 3, 5 in the world. Carlin Isles and Perry Baker are, cast-off athletes.
Yeah.
Nia Tapper and Alev Kelter on our women's teams are, back in the field and things like that. So, look, we have such a big population, right? That pyramid at the top of most sports is not just a pyramid; it's like an inverted pyramid. It's like they're shooting off players right, left, and center all the time. And so, there's a lot of people in 22 that still see an athlete in the mirror, and that's what I was, right? I still saw an athlete. I wasn't making the NFL, or it was it's a business at that level, so you're trying to do all those different things, and I stumbled across this other thing, and that's there. So look, we didn't have a next step for most rugby players. We didn't have a professional league, and there's only a certain amount of people based on passports and capability that can go into a foreign league membership. So now that we have the MLR, you have a place for guys to go, and ultimately for the world game to change, and for more countries to be competitive, more markets to be unlocked, they have to have their own domestic competition, otherwise, you won't get there, right? You're always subsidizing that, right? You're always, doing that. And that's probably some of the sea change that's going to be forced upon by COVID, is that, okay, what's the product development strategy in every country? And then what is the value proposition of every country? Can it provide for itself and provide for the rest of the world?
Yeah.
The U.S. soccer market, for example, and I know I'm going on, the U.S. soccer market pre-1994, the Soccer World Cup was here, which is still the most attended World Cup ever, right? Yeah. 1994 was 20 million, 25 million was the value of that now, right? It's now in the billions, right?
Yeah.
You've got the Atlanta United is worth $500 million. The Galaxy that we own, that Beckham played in and Robbie Keane played in, and Zlatan, just finished up, is worth 450 million, right? The Premier League rights fees in America by NBC are over $1 billion, right? So the dollar numbers here are dramatic. So unlocking the value, the World Cup sponsors, Coca-Cola, they're based in Atlanta. MasterCard, they're based in Purchase, New York, right? They're, so that you've got to think about unlocking it. So the value of the U.S. market, can return for everybody else as well. So that's a little bit of a strategy of what I think how World Rugby is going to be thinking, coming out of the back of this is how do we create, better value.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm going to just a little bit onto something that you've said, Dan. Obviously, going back, having the trials of Minnesota and everything like that, you were given the option, particularly at that time, to go and play in the NFL professionally or stick with a professional rugby path. Which you've gone for and why?
Yeah. So I literally, and I have them on my wall in my office. This is my home office in work. So I have a Bath contract and a Minnesota Viking contract, and really for the 1996 season, was there and so forth. And so all of my friends, American friends, so forth, you are a lunatic. What are you doing? There's no. They hadn't seen rugby because it wasn't really on. You had to really kind of chase it to find it, over here. So the football and the business of rugby, I had just spent about 2.5 years of my life traveling around the world, playing a sport for the U.S., and really kind of seeing something that was completely different and really falling in love with it, for all practical purposes, and then being asked by the best club, in the UK, if not one of the best in the world, to come over and play.
You're talking about Gloucester, sorry. You must be talking about Gloucester, right?
Yeah. So personal invitations to come visit the shed. So
there you go.
I wouldn't.
Yeah. I've just run by. The opportunity in the NFL, you have to make the team, and then you have to get past the third game of the season to be guaranteed your salary for that year. It's not like they sign players and then you're there for the season. There's a lot of making the team and camps and whittling down and all that kind of stuff. So, I just didn't know what that process was going to be like. And certainly on retrospect, I met my wife over there. I have 3 boys, and it was funny. My son had show and tell this morning. I didn't. These are not props. I get ready for this, but he brought it in. He's in 3rd grade over here, which is a primary school, and it was kind of like, what makes you and what do you do and so forth. And he showed my father, who's a retired general officer, and then he showed his British passport and his American passport. So I wouldn't have accomplished and done all the things I've done, and obviously have the family that I have. So I have 0 regrets.
Awesome.
And, sorry, I wasn't actually going to ask this, but you just brought it up. Son, sort of primary school age over here and everything. A lot of people talk about injuries in rugby, etc., American football. As somebody who's experienced both of them and see how the game has developed on a professional front at the moment, which, let's say from a safety aspect, or even obviously a lot of it is down to technique, etc., you feel would actually be more beneficial, while on a fitness level, or safer for children to start going into? Would you put the American football versus rugby, or would you encourage them to play both? Or yeah.
Look, I love both. I think that there's a couple of things that rugby has that are called cards Americans, and particularly Americans that might like football or play football. One is the culture and the values, right? I mean, certainly in the professional era, there's a lot of yin and yang to that, are we losing it or not losing it and all that kind of stuff. But from the perspective that, you call the referee sir, you shake hands, you do a few other things that are absolutely required, you respect each other. The actual playing of the game engenders yourself because everybody's doing everything. Where in American football, you don't, right? You're single-minded, one position, all that kind of stuff. So that aspects, when you watch soccer or your football or go to football over here, it's really, really hard to look at the values of those games and really be excited about it, right? I mean, soccer players are doing things on the field and people are doing things in the stands that you're just like, my God. And I played until I was 18. And I love the game of soccer. I played in Germany growing up, and I mean, it's an exciting sport, but from a prospect of that, it's it doesn't teach a lot of things that you want your children to do. And then in football, coaches yelling from the sidelines, fans yelling things. It's hard to go to a football game, just like it's hard to go to a football game over there without seeing that. Rugby has kind of had that now, has those aspects to it. To answer the question though about injuries and concussion and all that kind of stuff, the NFL, the American football is a collision sport, right? I mean, it's absolutely, it's run into somebody. It's slowly changing because of all of the issues to a rugby, which is a tackling sport, right? And inherently, head in the right places, at the right times, and people move at different directions. So it doesn't always happen, but you're taught cheek to cheek, right? You're taught to wrap, you're taught all of those things. So it actually in America is actually an answer to a lot of football's problems. So inherently it feels safer. But the irony of it, what a lot of American football coaches are finding out is that because you have to wrap and you have to get closer and you have to put your shoulder on somebody, it's a more successful tackle, right? They're actually better at what they do, because of that. And I think, Neil, you were referencing that in your football days, your American football days.
It's very limited days, unfortunately.
Right. And here's the best. There's lots of straight evidence of that, but the Nate Ebner, who's won 3 Super Bowls with the New England Patriots and played in Rio for the U.S. team. After Rio, which Bill Belichick, one of the best New England Patriots coaches, gave him that time off. All his buddies watched him. He didn't have to go to camp late and all that kind of stuff. The year after the Super Bowl, he did those 6 months of just intense rugby, played in the Olympics and so forth. He made the Pro Bowl, which is the best of the NFL in special teams, which all it is tackling, right? And kickoffs and after that kind of stuff, he went back to it. So there's a lot of lessons for American football out of rugby, and probably vice versa. And that's got to be part of the calling card for the growth of the game for here.
Do you think that there is a stigma between Americans who don't fully understand the game towards rugby? The reason I asked that, I had an American quarterback I used to play with, and I was desperately trying to get him involved in rugby, because he was fast, he knew he could read the game well, obviously American football. And his response was, "No way, man, you guys stick fingers in each other's assholes." I'm like, well, if that's what Americans think, then there's a long way to go. I mean, do you think that there's a sort of long way to go in people's mindsets of the differences and whether, they're trying to get their kids into it?
Well, you've just taken this podcast to another level by, talking about the down under of us, of all of our, look, it has some stereotypes here of mudblood beers, right? Because of the, there's 1,000 universities that play the game. Literally, I'm not lying. There, almost 700 men's programs, almost 400 women's programs. There's, so most people are introduced it and seen it there. And because it's not a varsity sport on a lot of campuses, right? There's probably only 50 or 60 of those universities that take it as serious as other sports on campus. It becomes a, societal, cultural thing that you see I've been to the rugby party, right? So there's a bit of that. I think that it wasn't exposed for a very long time, right? Until the conclusion came, and that vote was in 2009. NBC started showing it a lot more, and a lot more people are exposed to it. The problem is that our big sports, possession is king, right? So even though football is complex, you're not giving the ball away unless you have to, right? In basketball, you're not giving the ball away unless you have to, and in sevens, which is, you're not giving the ball away unless you have to as well, right? And it's a stripped down version. That's why it's kind of a American attention span oriented, right? But if people are like, what are you doing? Why are you giving the ball away? Okay, I get it that you want to get it over the line, but the complexities of 15s, just like for you guys, the complexities of football, even though the possession is maintained, meaning the American football is there. So you have to get people watching it a little bit more, and it's got to be regularly available, the appointment television. And that's only been the last, 5 to 8 years that's been of the case, and that's been part of what I've done for the last decade is getting the Premiership rights over here, then getting European rights over here, then getting the Six Nation rights over here, then World Cup rights. So all of that stuff is much more. If I'm a mom or a dad or a athletic director, I can on Saturday mornings I can watch Rugby Premiership just like I can watch Premier League, and that's an education process.
Yeah. Would you support? Sorry, one more just to tie on to that. Would you support a competition similar to the Six Nations, with sort of like maybe North America? I don't know how much South America plays rugby, but maybe Argentina, USA. Some of the teams from over that side. Would you think that would sort of help and bring rugby on?
So there is a championship that's been played for the last 3 years. It's in essence
right.
the American Rugby Championship, the ARC, which is now in a August to September window, and I think everything's back on the table for World Rugby. But it's still Chile, Uruguay, U.S., Canada, and the Argentina 15, their quote on second team, and it's been played for 3 years. I think we were second twice and won it once. Beat Argentina's 15. In 2018, probably the U.S.'s most successful year. They, I think, went 9-1. Beat Scotland. So did some stuff. So yeah, that level of competition, North and South America have to get better, and they have to play each other more. Based upon time zones, based upon a lot of factors. We need Brazil to be bigger. It's such a big country, in a lot of different ways. And that's what I was referencing earlier. There has to be a value proposition attached to each in the product development. But yeah, Argentina flies to New Zealand and South Africa.
Yeah.
That's just not sustainable, right? In a lot of ways, if you're thinking about a global game versus a regional game.
So how do you see overall as a product rugby in the US? Obviously USA Rugby with the bankruptcy, and now we're seeing I'm seeing a huge influx of news articles online about them potentially hosting a World Cup or part of the bidding. How is that's quite two ends of the spectrum there. What's your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's funny. In 1988, USA Soccer was several months of bankruptcy and probably had 3 sets of jerseys in the shed out back. They were and said, okay, look, we got to change this dialogue, right? You got a lot of people playing the game, and of course America is like Ireland to Istanbul, right? There's a lot of pockets and a lot of different things going on, right? So, we've got to figure out a way to create your structure that it rewards itself. It becomes self-sustaining, in and of itself. And I think that, because it's not the sports that was ingrained into the American culture, even in here longer than football and a lot of the other things. It just it didn't follow that same pathway of scholastic adaptation, not just collegiate club, but collegiate varsity. It didn't have a pro league, and up until the last Olympics, it wasn't Olympic either, right? That's what America does. Yeah. In that system, and it kind of operated, and no offense, being driven here, it kind of operated like a Commonwealth, adopted, model where, how do we do things in UK and how do we do things in New Zealand, and that's how rugby should be done over here, right? And so what's been forced, through the trying to do things and some of these economic issues and COVID and a few other things is, okay, how do we create the structure that is really strong American sports complex pillars? And that is, and now World Rugby, I think, has really caught on to that, and the structures that are amateur in America are really talking about that out loud for the first time. We've just been a really discombobulated group of individual personalities and individual fiefdoms doing a bunch of stuff, and adaptation of that American system will allow us to move forward. And you put MLR on top, you've got 12, 14 entrepreneurs investing in the game, that can push down grassroots structures there. Those two things combined, and World Rugby not treating the U.S. like Japan or Fiji or Romania, treating it like it's a market, all of those people working together. I've always said to unlock America, it'll take America understanding its systems combined with international rugby understanding how it can support those systems for it to be unlocked. And there's nothing like a crisis for that to happen. But if you get those building blocks right and you start building in the future, 2031 is 10 years away, right? And if you really think about that dialogue and, giving people some vision and some foresight, some investment structures, some stadia dialogue, a lot of things that comes with World Cups, right away you start, you can start kind of backfilling a lot of the structure that needs to happen. And look, if you really think about it, every game would be a home game for every country that came. We have that. Forget anybody even coming to this country, right? We have that many Brits and that many Australians and that many Tongans, so, and let alone the influx. So it would be a successful World Cup. Yeah. You just have to be able to make sure that it's not for nothing, right?
The thing is, America would do it right, let's be honest. Like you mentioned the Football World Cup. I remember that. I was very young at the time, but I do remember how big it was and how, that must have massively pushed football or soccer in America. So do you think America are ready to host one now, or do you think they're a few years off?
You need a competitive team too. I mean, the thing about that '94 team was they got to the quarterfinals, right? And you had some guys that are it was a big athletic team. It wasn't necessarily the most skillful team, but their set pieces in soccer, football, their ability to kind of put the ball down the field, get in front of a defender, trap. They were just a really good athletic team, and you need a really good athletic American team that's interlaced with a few skillful players, and that's going to take a quad or two. It won't just take U.S. 10 good quality games because there's a steel reinforced ceiling there, right? You got to magically graft some fourth hamstrings onto some people and some skill work onto some people. That's the MLRs come at the right time, right? To lift that conversation, and it needs to be done in a coordinated way. So, Americans like winners, as well, right? So you need to be able to project that your team is going to be, to be successful.
Mm-hmm. So I do.
So just circling back round, how did we just come back around to your career. How did you move to Bath come about?
Yeah, so I was playing a test match in Canada against obviously Canada, and it was the first time we'd ever beaten Canada in Canada, and it was right when rugby was going professional. With a few scouts about, and at the time, there was, I think, Bath for a long time, there was a dearth of second row forwards, right? You had Nigel Redmond and Martin Hogg were the two that were the biggest the guys there, but they weren't super tall. You know what I mean? I think I was as tall as they were, maybe taller in that regard. And so I had a teammate named Luke Gross, who played for the Harlequins and played in Wales, played in Italy, and he was 6'9", right? And so they were kind of looking at him, and I just smashed the game, got man of the match, and which was like a 25-year-old bottle of Canadian Club whiskey, which was wonderful. The only problem is that I got pulled out for doping testing, right after the game, and so forth, random, right?
Yeah.
Which is the irony of the European Cup. All the photos afterwards, I'm not in any of the championship photos because I was the only one that got pulled out for doping after that game. I was literally in the pisser the whole time while everyone else was, doing this. They actually left to go to the next, to go to the party walk because I couldn't pee. I was like, you guys didn't give your effort, man. I couldn't pee after the game. The cool thing about that, and I know I'm blending two stories, that I got a ride to the after party, with the official after party with all the Heineken girls, right? So it was like, the Heineken, so I was in the Heineken bus, going to the after party in Bordeaux, and anyway, I had a really good game in that game, and one thing led to another. John Hall, who was the director of rugby at the time, up and said, "Hey, have a conversation," and so I did, and I flew over. I literally had a match in San Francisco, had a match in Japan against Japan, flew to London and took the train down to Bath, and then flew home. So I literally went around the world to have this thing. And it was right after the season had ended. It was kind of the June time period.
Yeah.
There were no players around. I stayed in a hotel on Great Paltney Street, and no one was around. No one was there to take me out.
The stadium wasn't up or anything, I imagine?
No, it was nothing. I was just kind of like, but of course it was a beautiful town. I was like, I need to get something to eat. And there was an Italian at the time by the Theatre Royale in Bath. And so I went over there, sitting in my own Jack, having my own Italian. And there was a bar right outside, across the street there that had a queue, out. All right, man, I'm 25 years old. I'm like, hey, I'll just go to the bar, have a drink, see what's going on, single and all that. I'm going through the queue 10 minutes later, and I go up to the front, and the guy asked for my ID. Now, you guys aren't used to that, right, at all. In America, I am, because they card everybody, right? Yeah. So I pull out my card, and I'm 25, and he looks at me, he goes, you do realize it's under 18 night. I'm like, yeah, okay. I didn't really realize that, so that was my intro to Bath. I was back on the train the next morning, and came back a couple months later for preseason. So.
Amazing. Saying about obviously your career at Bath and everything, you've had a great career there, obviously over 100 caps and everything. And then obviously also you're US Rugby Hall of Fame, aren't you, now as well?
What did they say?
I was going to say, you had the Heineken Cup final win against Breve and played with some top players like Jeremy Guscott, Johan Evans. Going away from that, what was your experience like playing in the West Country derbies? That must have been new for you, especially coming over here.
I was super fortunate, right, to land in Bath, right? I mean, you can't. The city's beautiful. There's pockets of sunshine over it where a lot of the other parts of the country feel like they're socked in. It just feels like a pretty magical place, and the Rec is right in the heart of it all, and it's a rugby town, right? It's not like a lot of places, and so. And the credit of all the fans there, playing well. Everyone, it was like, oh, well, who's this guy? Why is he there? Right? Is that if you play well, it was a merit-based, and the team was like that, right? The team was purely merit-based, right? It was if you're playing well, you do well. So I was really fortunate to kind of come into that, as well as to come into an era of players, as well as kind of the next era of players that was coming through or starting to come through, the Tyndalls and Balshalls and Borthwicks and those guys and some of the signings we had. I mean, I'm just super fortunate to be part of an era of the old amateurism continuing through and that new line of professionalism of just some of the best players around and some really good coaches. A lot of people don't realize that, obviously John Hall there, who's a player's kind of guy, and Andy Robinson and Jonathan Cullard, who've been there for a long time, but also, Brian Ashton, was a player's coach, all about putting the ball through your hands, and that was the way that I played, sport and rugby. And Clive Woodward came in for a bit of time as a consultant, and so who was also a very open-minded type of a guy. So we played, we had the Aussies that came in, that were a bit more scripted. That kind of led to some of the exodus of some of the guys like me and Caddy and Magsy and Balsh and Tins and all that kind of stuff. Because, I don't think we were very happy with leading the league and scoring tries to running 7 phases before you score a try, before you actually do something, right? That was the kind of the differences of opinion at the time, and ultimately why I left to go to Leicester. But yeah, just super fortunate there.
So obviously, obviously playing in that and everything.
But sorry, to answer your question, Bristol is a soccer city, but it's also a rugby city, right? Gloucester definitely is a city, in that regard. And so those West Country derby, Exeter, I'm serving the soccer down there now with that as a quote unquote West Country derby. The West is so rich in rugby, right? It's a vital part of everything that everybody does, and they know about it. It's in the papers, so those West Country derbies, they mean so much to the fans, right? It just can't help you feel it. I mean, you absolutely. And so those games are, you want to play in, right? It's funny that there was probably less of a vibe around going to Leicester, which is a wonderful place to play, and look, maybe that's the exclusion, but going to Saracens, going to Harlequins, going to Wasps, going to London Irish, certainly going to back in the day to Bedford or West or places like that. No offense to anybody from those places, right? But it was West Country derbies, the Leicester game, which were the ones that everybody wanted to play.
Yeah. And what was the team that you thought you looked on the fixtures list and you were like, oh, for God's sake, we got them this week? Who was the team you really? I mean, obviously you play against everyone; it's part of a professional sort of remit. But there must be one team you think, oh God, not them again.
Yeah, I certainly think that you couldn't communicate with your team the way that you communicate with your team. Except for when you were at the Shed in Gloucester, right? Yeah. It was just one of those places. There was an intimidating factor, from the crowd, and that it wasn't too different at the Memorial Ground now, in Bristol, from that sense. And having gone to Leicester, played there for a season afterward, and so forth, that was basically. You just wanted to beat them because you thought that was going to be the league side games and things like that. But everywhere else was kind of in flux, right? London Irish were playing at their old ground. It was a different environment. Saracens were playing. But playing at Watford was wonderful. It was a cool playing in the soccer facility. Playing at the old what was it? Where Wasp played for a period of time. Sorry.
Adams Park in Wickham.
No. They played in before that. They played in the central London at the football ground. Jesus, why am I drawing not cottage? I'll think of it in a second. Anyway, the some football were a lot of fun to go play in. Having seen what those vibes were like. But yeah. I definitely didn't like to get on the bus to go. Northampton is obviously grown over time, but going to the West Harley pools, the sale, like that, it was all about coming through Cheltenham on the way back, and going to the Cheltenham line.
Did you ever do the Bath Road Run? Did you ever do the Bath Road Run in Cheltenham?
Yeah.
You did.
That was the highlight of those trips, particularly with the refrigerators on the bus, where water on the way up and cider on the way back, right?
Brilliant. Well, we're almost getting to weird scenario Neil time, but there's a question we've been asking all of our guests recently, and we like putting people on the spot. That's why we haven't preempted and told you about it. We'd like you to pick Dream 15 from anyone you've ever played with and against, if you like. But a lot of our guests have said, actually, no, we'll just go with played with. So what would be your sort of dream team you would pick? Because what we're going to do is print all these teams up from all the different guests and then get viewers and people who subscribe to the group to sort of we're going to have a virtual sort of World Cup-ish, with all these people's teams. So, who would you pick? And obviously, going to disappoint some people. And
yeah. Oh, that's yeah. So yeah, I guess I'll have to. So that's the guys I played with at Bath. The Bath.
In your career. So anyone you've ever played with, and I can open it up to people you played against as well. But a lot of people we've put it to have said, actually, we'll just do it with people that I've played with. So however you want to do it, however you've you had shared a pitch with in rugby, basically.
Yeah, I mean, some of those barbarian teams were crazy good stuff, right? Obviously, you have a hard time not picking Jonah Lomu,
Yeah.
Yard. So it's it was the give it to Jonah tours, when on the barbarians, right? So it's just go run over somebody, and but he was also we called him the black hole. There was never a pass coming back from Jonah Lomu, right? So he never met a ball that didn't become his, and then he took home with, right? So
could I just ask, saying about the Barbars, Mickey Steele-Bodger.
Sorry?
Obviously being involved with barbarians and stuff like that. What was your experience like of the late Mickey Steele-Bodger?
Oh, well, he was a magical human being, right? He was a combination of one of those landed lords of the 18th century, mixed with a wit of a leprechaun, combined together, and certainly had nothing but love and respect for the players that he brought in, and everybody. Right? He just just kind of one of those old school guys. I didn't know his personal character because I didn't spend as much time with him, but he certainly loved the barbarian way of life, in that regard. So never met a wine glass he didn't adore, in that regard. So but yeah, so look, there's a lot of great players, so the guys that I played with, probably doesn't do justice to the guys I played with week in and week out on the U.S. and unless you're, someone like a Jonah Lomu and all that kind of stuff, because the Zinzan Brooks and the Ian Joneses and all those of the worlds and the Eusts and things like that, they're all there, and I was lucky to play in a wonderful era and following on. But
well, you would be the only person out of everyone we've asked to pick Jonah. So these teams are so vastly different. It's great. It's really good to see. So yeah, I'd be really interested to see what sort of the rest of the team will look like.
All right, so I'm sure I'll change it, as I go along.
Yeah.
I had, he didn't get picked on the day in Europe, but just a guy that I loved being on the shoulder of, starting at the back, was Matt Perry, and loved Pezza, loved everything about him, and on and off the field. So he was great. I'll stick with Jonah on the wing.
That's a good choice.
I think that that guys, that the other wing is really difficult, to pick from. There's so many guys. Enough with guys like Yan, there's a year or two, and there was a lot of guys that were in and out of those squads that I would have played with, and trying to racking my brain of, if it was for purely off the field, it would have been, Adebayo, of course, right? It's there was so many different environments. It was awesome. Let me come back to that. I would pick, hands down, Jerry is, the most, that I probably, Gusket, that I probably played with, hands down. I think that Tins was always underrated, because he, we were lifting him and kickoffs at times. He was so athletic, and and he and I would have, things, contests that I love playing with Tins, and of course Caddy. If Jerry was the most gifted, Mike was universally the most talented. So gifted versus talented in that regard. So probably there. So I'm only left out the wing there. I'll have to come back to that. Only a couple of years with him, but you have to have Vulcan mind meld with 9s and 10s. So Andy Nix was awesome. And he to this day and banter back and forth. Probably go with him. Love playing in the back row. My first couple of European Cup with Richard Webster and Nathan Nathan Thomas, but my teammates and I certainly the most fun I had was like 2001 when Ben Clark and Angus Gardner and I played most of the games together. New Zealand player, probably one of the only New Zealand open sides that never played for the All Blacks. He was so gifted, there for the year, and he was at Bath at the time with like John Preston, who was the All Blacks as well. There's two universal 9 and 10, but I had two players in the back row for the U.S. Dave Hodges, who played for Llanelli for 8 or 9 years and was just awesome, and Port Schubert, who played for Cardiff for a couple of years, and those guys just, those guys were wonderful teams. Probably the two of them. I always say the back row that I've always respected the most, against most, was Richard Hill. And so you really liked the way that he played the game. He's unsung, right? Neil Back and Lawrence got all the love and for different reasons, and he was probably a guy but he just had the ability to just get underneath you, every single time, So wonderful to play with in that regard. I played with a guy named Alec Parker in the U.S. He never played professionally. He was a gentleman of Aspen. That was his rugby club, which is really interesting. He was a cowboy, a miner, and just one of the hardest guys I've ever been around. So loved him. And then the other, in the U.S., I'm in the U.S. Hall of Fame with Luke, who played at the Harlequins, and he's just a human being, and and consistently played with a lot of really good players. But I probably would say Steve Borthwick, only because there was Danny Grucock was a wonderful friend, and we've seen each other recently, and there's nothing like seeing him in red mist, going and so forth. But Steve was like me; he was a student of the game, right? He in a lot of ways just really wanted to learn all the time. And unfortunately, he said he played like U18 basketball for England, and to me, like a U18 is like a high school. Michael Jordan was a high school All-American, and so I played basketball against him because I played basketball in high school, and I beat him like really quickly and handedly, and so I kind of realized that basketball in England and versus like rugby in America were two different dimensions. So Steve was there. Victor Victor Abugu in the front row was a guy that you couldn't get around in training, and you couldn't get around in the bar afterwards. So he's a wonderful guy. Played with Mark Regan and Federico Mendez, and had some wonderful times with them. But my old teammate who became my coach, who played at Harlequins for a number of years, Tom Billups, would probably be the hooker for me. Mm-hmm. And then Lou said, there's a lot of that European Cup team was great and wonderful guy, and a lot of guys. Probably a guy Mike played a number of years professionally over there with Leeds and Worcester and so forth. The captain of that team for a little bit. So probably Mike would be the guy that I would pick. And so I've avoided the Barbarians and other played against guys only because it probably discredits the guys that you play with week in and week out, which is probably your bread and butter.
And what about that problematic other wing then? So you're going to come back?
That is a you know the guy that I only played with like 4 or 5 times, and that you just looked at him in practice, and he had all these problems. Was Simon Gagan? Remember Simon Gagan played for Ireland and Irish and so forth. I wouldn't pick him, but he's just one of those guys.
No,
I would if I would have played with him more, because you could just see it, right? You could just, when you see a guy like that, you just know he's there. So maybe I'll substitute. I'll put Ian Balshaw on the other wing, and because when we were at our best in the 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, he's just so gifted, and was one of those guys that was just fun to be around, and and him and Tins were our thick as thieves, right? And there's all kinds of stories there, them living together, and it's hard to have a team. It's positive and negative energy, right? You have to have them both there for it to work, right? Anyway.
Brilliant. And who would you have managing this motley crew? That you've worked under or with?
Yeah, luckily, because I have Tom as my coach, and look, Jack Clark was my first coach, and on the men's team, I wouldn't be in the game without him. I certainly wouldn't be in the hall there. I think, like a lot of guys, the unsung guy that probably most guys learned from was Brian Ashton. And whether he was the right, he was in England and Ireland or all that kind of stuff. But as far as a coach, pure, everything you want, maybe Brian.
Yeah. Oh, good choice. We've responses, haven't we, from every guest?
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's picked 2 of the same player, which is great. I think it's really good, and I'll be interested to see when these posts go up, sort of what people think and who thinks.
That'd be good.
Yeah. Take a
lot. I thought you were going to ask me how to solve all of Bath's.
We haven't got long enough to solve Bath's problems. It's going to take too long.
Dan, don't set him up like that. Don't set him up like that.
Right.
We're gonna. You're in for a treat. You're in for scenario Neil now.
Yeah, it's going to get weird. I'm going to ease you in with a nice soft one, right? Which is what I'll be asking a lot of people. So, this is the lockdown question, right? You're on lockdown, right, with someone that you've played rugby with in your career. You have to be locked down with this person for 2 weeks. You cannot leave the house. You can't even have an hour's exercise. You are literally in the house with that person for 2 weeks. People are bringing you food. Who would make it an absolute living hell? Who, out of anyone you've ever played with, do you think, oh my God, I couldn't survive 2 minutes with, let alone 2 weeks? And why?
Playing with them. Well, that's easy. That's so easy. Mark Regan, right?
Right. Why is that?
Right. He is the best guy to be around and to be around all at the same time, right? We'll stitch you up. He's like Survivor, right? It's like you have to like,
I've heard a few stories,
and then plot against him at the same time, but because he's doing that with you the whole time, you know what I mean? He's So that's an easy one. I mean, you wouldn't be, his name should be Jack. He's like he is the but he's the guy that goes into the pizza shop and walks out with the pizza for himself right first, and there's no other orders the first drink and doesn't buy the last one, right? All of it.
That sounds like it'd be a good mate of mine.
Yeah. That'd be like you, Neil.
Yeah, cheers, mate. Right, now this one is a little bit weirder. It's going to take a little bit more. Right, so you wake up in a dark room. Don't worry, it's not that weird. Right, you wake up in a dark room, you hear a little squeak, and you think, what the hell is that? There's enough light in the room for you to see that little freaky bugger from the film Saw has just cycled into the room on a tricycle and asked you if you want to play a game. On the table, there are 5 bottles of Jaeger Bomb, 50 pints of Guinness, and 20 pints of ale, and you've only got 4 hours to drink them. Who do you pick and why? Well, obviously why, but who do you pick to help you get through that and get out of the room safely?
Yeah, well, maybe maybe it's the position they play, but the guy that could drink as much as anybody else. You need somebody with a hollow wooden leg, right? You need,
Yeah.
right, but also the ability to kind of distract you so he can throw stuff over the shoulder too, right? And there's nothing better than a language barrier for that, right? At the same time. So Fred Igor Mendez, the people that played hooker for Argentina, was on the team about when it first came for a few years, went on to Northampton, right, and won the European Cup with them. He understands, and he owns a winery, down in Argentina and all that kind of stuff. So he's one of those guys that you didn't want to have there, because he was a man mountain, could consume everything, but at the same time would at one time would pretend like he doesn't understand, the next moment he would be giving an Oxford laden narrative about why this why he overthrew X, Y, and Z, so
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, I think I'm going to work on some weirder ones, because we had a guy on yesterday, and he said that the questions weren't weird enough. So I think that's a little bit of a challenge, personally. So you feel yourself lucky that I've not had time.
Well, the thing is, you guys know, when you're on a team, particularly if you're on a professional team where it becomes your job and you're in each other's pockets and you're on a lot of tours, right? Remember that movie where the plane crashed in the Andes, Alive, right?
Alive, yeah.
They had to eat, became cannibals and all that kind of stuff. Well, every rugby club, you know who you're going to eat, right? you who's, if you're in, who would be the guy you attacked first, right? And
I'm assuming the guy that you're going to eat is the slowest and the biggest, right? Am I just assuming?
Potentially, you might find that you might gang up on them, set a trap, because you feel that they're just going to produce a quality steak. You just never know.
You've really thought about this. I love this. I'm going to have to consult you when it comes to my
this has gotten weirder and weirder.
You also know the weirdness of prison, right? Where you have to fend for yourself, but you also, right? So there's so you know what those guys look like as well, right? So.
So who would you eat? Just out of curiosity, who did you decide that you was?
Yeah. Those are my questions. So.
Fair enough.
Perfect. Well, I think on that very strange note, we'll call it a day there. Thank you very much for your time, Dan.
Been a pleasure.
Pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll have to get back on another one when there's some rugby to be chatting about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me. I hope you guys are staying safe and sane, and we'll.
1 out of 2 is not bad.
Yeah.
I'm certainly safe. I don't know about sane.
I'm not sure if that's an American football pitch, a rugby behind you there, Neil.
But whiteboard. It looks like I'm doing like loads
it's got columns. It's got columns, obviously, that are cut off, but
it's really boring.
There we go.
Yeah,
don't give away the company secrets.
It's right. No one from Hayes watches this. It's fine.
Carbonara Monday. Fish and chips.
You got it. Nailed it. No, it's been an honour, Dan. Thank you very much for coming on.
All right,
yes,
pleasure.
cheers,
Thank
Dan.
you.
Thank you very much.
Take care.